As you move through this handout, I want you to constantly think of the shape that you are coloring in. We are working on 5 circles. When shading a circle, you will turn it into a 3-dimensional looking sphere. So you need to work in directional strokes. On my feathering technique, I'm using strokes that will help show the curve of a sphere. Feathering is where you start by pressing a little harder and then you lift up as you get to the end of the stroke. And you're constantly lifting up and flicking the marker. This is used best for things like hair. Maybe if you drew a brush, the tip of the brush, different things like that. And I would add in an analogous color for the brighter area, not quite the highlight, but the mid-tone area. I used red for the area of shade. And then I'm going to go in with yellow for the highlighted area, make it even a little brighter. You will keep moving until all of the white disappears, continuing to add those directional flicked strokes. Next, I'm working on swirling. Swirling is where you're just coloring in mini, tiny circles, and then you can work in a second color. You don't have to, but this method of coloring oftentimes eliminates the directionality of the strokes. So it depends on what item you are coloring. Maybe you want to eliminate any types of strokes. When you use yellow and you kind of go over the green, you'll notice that you'll pull some of that green in. But you have to work quickly for the ink of the markers to continue to stay wet. Sometimes if I press too hard, though, I will end up ripping my paper, so you have to be careful. Moving on to the dabbing section, it's basically what it sounds. You're just going up and down in a ton of dots. I am adding purple to my blue, again working with analogous colors to create the area of shadow. So when you're working with this technique, think about what needs texture. Are you creating a leaf or a flower? How will the texture support the item you're coloring? Next, I'm going to do some mixing, and again, I'm still trying to follow the curve and the form of the circle, creating a sphere. So mixing is focusing on 2 colors mixing in the color in between. So yellow and blue would make green. Now it's not going to be as nice as the regular green marker, but you can see what happens. I went blue on top of yellow, and then yellow on top of blue will have a slightly different effect. So you'll want to practice before you just apply to your final draft paper. The last method is layering, where I'm going to start by coating the whole circle with yellow. Again, I'm going to leave an area of highlight, always moving my marker in the direction that will support the form. So you can see me using curved strokes, not straight, flat strokes across the circle because it is round. After completing the yellow, I'm going to add in an analogous color of orange to support the mid-tone, and then red for the shade and darker tone. So I am just layering the orange on top of the yellow, and what this does is the colors mix, but you still see the yellow through the orange, which makes them a little bit more cohesive than just the mixing technique. So here I'm going over the highlight a little bit more just because I felt like it was too bright white, and then adding the red in to make that final area of shade. Things to think about. The wetter the ink, the more likely the paper will rip, so give it time to dry between colors, especially if you are beginning a 3rd layer. It is okay to practice on a spare piece of paper. Markers, especially light colors like yellow, are translucent. This means you will see the pencil marks show through. Be smart about what you need to draw first and what you can just color with markers. Additional layers of the same color will get slightly darker. Note when you are coloring in strokes where they overlap. You will see that slightly darker path. Be careful so this doesn't happen, or add a 2nd layer so the color is uniform throughout. When you are coloring with your markers, think about how you're holding the tip. You have what is called a chisel tip. It can be wide or it can be skinny, depending on the direction you are holding it. You can color skinny points and you can make broad strokes. But whenever you're coloring with a marker, you tend to see the directional stroke. So you have to be smart about how you're coloring. Markers will also show the texture of whatever's underneath them. So I'm on my dining room table right now, so it's showing the wood grain texture underneath, which is not really, I mean, it kind of works for a leaf, but that's really not something I want on everywhere. Don't be afraid to add additional details with just marker. Some things you don't need to draw out first. When using a marker, you have to think about its translucency. So if I drew the same leaf quickly and then I colored it in with a light color such as yellow, you can usually see right through it. And it will tend to pull the graphite, that gray color, around and make your colors look muddy and messy. So that is not something that we want. When you are coloring your picture, think about the techniques that you did. So I started with yellow, and now I'm gonna go ahead and add some green to add some dimension. So this would be the layering technique. Originally, I was just going to do the center. I really didn't like how that looked, so I'm just going to color in the whole thing, and let's compare and see what that looks like. So what happens is you can still see that yellow underneath it slightly. So I'm just outlining so you can see the difference. So on the outside of my leaf, it's just green, but you can see the difference between where that just regular green is and where that yellow and then green is. And it's just a little bit more rich of a color. I can see the multi-tonal effect, which really does add some interest to the piece. So no matter what you're coloring, you can layer colors. I wouldn't recommend doing it everywhere, but at least pick a few areas where it would make sense. And then lastly, if you're mixing with your markers, I had shown that previously. If you're mixing with your markers, especially yellow, sometimes the tip can get messy. So if I'm going directly into the orange, I might have some traces of orange on the tip. So it's pretty good, but right at the beginning there was a bit. So before I go to an area where I want bright fresh yellow, on a spare piece of paper, I can rub off the tip to just make it nice and clean for that new area. Before you jump into coloring, I want you to think about if a black outline is something that you want to include on your piece of art. So on mine, I've already planned and I know that I want a black outline. I wanted a thin Sharpie, but unfortunately I'm at my house and now my only two thin black Sharpies don't work. So I can't trace this out. So I will work on what I've already done. However, up here, I want this to look like it's a Sharpie path, so I can use my thick Sharpie for that. However, I don't want to use this for my small Zentangle designs on my J because I feel like that's gonna ruin it and not show enough detail. Right now, I'm working on my dining room table at my house, and it has a wood texture, as you can see. And there's divots. So I actually ran across a few of those and I got some really choppy lines. So now what I need to do is problem solve that. And I'm gonna do that by making some of these areas a little thicker. So if you are tracing something and you go off the path or something happens, someone nudges you, you sneeze randomly, I don't know, whatever. I want you to be the problem solver. Don't just let it stay there. Try to incorporate it into the design. So what I'm gonna do is just, again, like I said, kind of keep going all on these lines and make them a little bit more smooth and uniform by having some areas on each be nice and thick. And then I can kind of color inside very carefully so that I don't go outside my zone. If I do, then I'm just gonna add one additional layer. Okay, so pretend I have everything traced in black because that's the aesthetic I want. However, I just said my thin ones aren't working. So now that I'm ready to color, I want to think about the colors that make sense for my items, okay? I have a pencil and I don't have all the colors that I would want for a pencil. But what I want to do is think about what is most important, and then maybe I can implement some colored pencil in some of the areas that I might not have. Or if you are coming to school, we can let you use markers that we have in school. You just have to wear gloves when you're using them so that you're staying sanitary. So for my pencil, I'm going to use a directional stroke just up and down because that makes sense for this item. I wouldn't go side to side because that's more likely that I will go outside the edges. So I'm just going to go up, down, and then I'm going to layer the colors on the color, I'm sorry, it's one color on top of itself, so that way it's nice, bold, I don't have any areas of white paper showing through. Now, because I traced this in Sharpie, it's not bleeding, so that black outline is solid. If I had traced this in the black watercolor marker, it would be smudging all over the place right now, and that would look sloppy and muddy. So think about the material you're using. Sharpies are permanent markers and they will not smudge when colored over with water, and there is water in these water-based markers. So I'm going very slow and I'm really looking at all the areas. Right here on my paper, if I hold it up to you really, really close, you might be able to see it. I actually have an area where it started to rip up. So that means I was making it too wet by coloring over it too much, too fast. So sometimes you need to let the markers dry in between coats, especially if you're adding a second color, to maybe add a little area of shadow or shade. Because on this pencil, I want to make it a little more round. So what I'm gonna do is go with the analogous color orange and make some strokes, like feathering motions, to create some roundness to it. But I am gonna wait until this dries. Here I'm switching to my artist markers that I have at home, which really are not that expensive, and I bought them off Amazon. I always test the color before I use it because they sometimes never look like what the cap shows. And then you'll notice me coloring the eraser in directional strokes. I do give it an outline to help me stay within my area, but then I'm coloring in a curved line to show the form of the pencil. Then I'm going back with a darker pink to add an area of shade. And that again just increases the three-dimensionality, and that's a technique that I want to focus on. Yours could remain completely flat, but I want to add dimension to mine. So I'm just again going in slightly curved strokes, adding layers of color. Here I went back in with the original pink. I tested my gray, I liked it, and now I am doing the same method for the metal part of the pencil. So again, I outline and then I'm going in directional strokes, and then I kind of layer over the left side some more to make it darker, because like I said previously, when you add additional layers of marker, it gets more saturated and deeper. I'm going to use that same gray down at the tip for the graphite, and then I'm going to trace over the line of pretend pencil mark that I had done, similarly to what I did up top with black, which is supposed to be Sharpie. So again, wherever I saw there was an area where I kind of stopped and the marker became more saturated, I'm going over those areas to make a nice, clean, uniform color. So even though you're using simple markers, you can still repeat steps, go over areas, and really focus on the craftsmanship. Next, I'm trying to find a color for the wooden part of the pencil, and I'm having a lot of trouble. I just really want to test all the options, even if the color cap wasn't quite right. So here, you may not have as many color options as me if you're just using the class pack of 8, so obviously you wouldn't have to do this. If you're in school and you want to use our larger assortment of markers, then I highly encourage this process of testing through the markers, even if you're not sure exactly what you want to use. It just helps you kind of look at them and compare. So I found the one that I want to use. I'm just double checking I grabbed the right one, and then I'm going to go ahead and color that tip. Again, I'm outlining it just a little bit and focusing on the directional strokes inside the area. And then I'm going to add just a little bit more to that left side to follow the area of darkness, shadow. I found a slightly different yellow, and I'm going back and adding some deeper yellow to that left-hand side. I just didn't like the shade area. I thought it didn't contrast enough, and you can't be afraid to push the contrast within your piece of art. So here for the Sharpie, I would have ideally traced the whole thing first with a thin black Sharpie, but as previously said, my two are busted here at home. So I'm doing the cap because the cap is going to be black. I'll later go back to the base and color that, or excuse me, trace that in with thin Sharpie after. As discussed, markers are translucent, so you want to make sure you get rid of all unnecessary pencil mark before you begin coloring, because once you color over a pencil mark with marker, it's permanent and it will not go away, and it's going to bother you. Here I'm coloring the base of the Sharpie with the gray that I selected that I thought was right. I'm starting on that left-hand side because the left-hand side can be darker, because the left-hand side is where I'm continuing to consistently show the area of shade. I start again like I did with the eraser with directional strokes. However, it's not quite working how I want. The color is globbing up in some areas where I'm hitting and going back and forth swiping. So what I do is I end up switching to up and down strokes, and then you'll notice how I'm going to layer an additional directional stroke after. So first I'm trying to get an even base, and I'm going in between. And again, you can always see where the marker point overlaps. I just pointed it out, and I'm just trying to get that even color across. Then I'm going to go over with the right to left, left to right, slightly curved marks to show the form a little better. So this is something that you can also do if you're getting a little frustrated going in one way when coloring something. If you're missing lots of white spots, then try a different direction. And always, 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 I am rotating my paper around to make it easier for me. Adding the darker area on the left to, again, create more form. I'm going in to my Sharpie cap, coloring it with black, but I'm not using the Sharpie to color because I want to keep that fine tip on my Sharpie for later things. So Sharpies you don't really use to color. You want to use your black watercolor marker for this. The last thing I'm doing is going back and adding some orange to the shade area of the pencil because I just didn't see enough contrast within it.